And we are going to begin, though, with that story that Squawk Box was just covering, this news developing around our parent company, Comcast. And for that, let's bring in who else? Our own David Faber, who's going to give us more. David is on the phone. But, David, what do you know here?
You know, Scott, of course, busy day for everybody here, and you guys got a lot to get to. But certainly this is something that I guess many shareholders of Comcast and others in the entertainment industry and the cable networks industry would have anticipated as a possibility. What we know is all at this point is what was just said by Mike Kavanagh, who runs NBC Universal, on the conference call for what also were, by the way, fairly strong earnings for Comcast and getting a good response in the stock market, at least in the early going, obviously, before trade. But he said that the company is exploring whether by creating a new, and this is an important usage here, well-capitalized company owned by shareholders, so spun off to shareholders and comprised of a strong portfolio of cable networks, would position them to take advantage of opportunities in the changing media landscape and create value. So what are they saying? Well, they're saying that they're at least exploring, and my understanding is it is very early here. They chose to say it on the call as a result of the fact that it most likely would have leaked. And so they're even at the point where it's not clear to me that they've hired advisors, for example, but they are exploring the possibility of spinning off all of the cable networks, including, by the way, the one that we work for. But you're talking USA, Bravo, E, Oxygen, CNBC, MSNBC, the Golf Channel, into a new, well-capitalized company that would then be able to potentially pursue strategies that it is not capable of doing right now. We all know, Jim and I talk about it endlessly with Carl, of course, as you well know, about the continued declines in the cable universe, the cord cutting that actually continues at a pace that many had thought would have abated by now, but only continues perhaps at even a stronger rate than had been anticipated, certainly. You've got companies that still generate a good amount of cash flow, would conceivably trade at very low multiples, though, given their lack of growth, but nonetheless might be able to find an audience amongst investors and then go out and maybe merge with others or do some other things that could conceivably enhance their value. At the same time, guys, I got to say, you think about what they're not or considering spinning, which includes NBC News staying with the parent, Peacock, the studio stays with NBC Universal. It's not completely clear to me how you can cleave entertainment networks from the studio and Peacock, in other words, USA and Bravo and E, and how you can cleave CNBC and MSNBC from the news network as well. That's certainly something that will be studied. And I guess we'll find out in the coming weeks and months whether, in fact, that is a real possibility. So that's kind of what we know at this point.
David, what happens if they're trying to separate the divisions that are not making that much money from the divisions that are making a lot of money? And the reason I mention this is because we're making a lot of money. I don't understand why we wouldn't go with NBC News.
Well, as I understand it, Jim, the plan being contemplated and studied, and again, I can't stress enough, this is early. The company chose to announce it as a result of the fact that it didn't want it leaking out, which is often the case. As I understand it, NBC News would stay with standalone NBC Universal, which would, if this plan were to happen, no longer include many or all of its cable networks. Although, again, the plan could change to perhaps including only the entertainment cable networks being spun and news being kept, or vice versa. Take a listen to what Kavanagh said on the call. We have that for you.
We are now exploring whether creating a new, well-capitalized company owned by our shareholders and comprised of our strong portfolio of cable networks would position them to take advantage of opportunities in the changing media landscape and create value for our shareholders. We are not ready to talk about any specifics yet, but we'll be back to you as and when we reach firm conclusions.
Yeah, so a lot of specifics to come, guys, including, of course, trying to answer that question that you raised, Jim. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but what it does sort of indicate, of course, as you might expect, is companies like NBC Universal, like Warner Brothers Discovery, Paramount, of course, which is having a change in ownership, Disney, they're studying and thinking about so many different things, as they have to, because, of course, as we have discussed endlessly, their core business in terms of cable networks is in decline. And it's in a decline that doesn't seem to at least be close to concluding anytime soon.
Hey, David, it's Scott. Let me lean on your expertise here for a minute. You mentioned Paramount. Kavanagh did as well. when he suggested as well on the call, quote, as you know, we chose not to participate in the M&A process around Paramount. Why, I guess, would be my question to you, as you've studied, the potential partners here, potential suitors for some of the properties as close as you covered the Paramount deal, which was so recent. Why would NBC or Comcast choose not to do a deal like that? Why would it choose not to do another deal that may be out there and think that this would be the best road ahead at the current time?
Well, one is regulatory, which would have been difficult because you're talking about, and not impossible, but you're talking about CBS and NBC, as you know, Scott. And so one would certainly, you'd have to figure out a divestiture package that is not necessarily that easy to do. That said, there also is always the question of how you structure it and whether it would be brought in or best doing a deal in some way that would have included a spin of NBCU and Paramount and a merger. But you're right. It was something where there was an expectation perhaps that Comcast would choose to at least take a look. There are a number of reasons, including, of course, regulatory being amongst them, that they didn't. One of the reasons you would have is not because you want more cable networks. And by the way, let me actually add that to the list right at the top as to why you also would not necessarily have done it. Because your shareholders don't want more cable networks. They don't want more challenging businesses coming in. And so I think the complexion of the company would not necessarily have changed in a way that would have encouraged shareholders, despite what would have been enormous synergies with the two studios.
Right, but David, because I know we've got a ton of stuff today, but I don't understand why I would ever want to buy that entity, other than if I knew they were going to merge with CNN, but whether under a Trump or a Harris administration.
Yeah, Jim, I think that's a reasonable question in terms of, is there really going to be sponsorship for something like that that's going to potentially have declining cash flows? Or is there a strategy somehow when you put all these things together and spin them out there into the world on their own with perhaps not a lot of debt, because they say well capitalized, that they can do deals that somehow will enhance their future? I mean, I don't know the answer. That's what they're going to be studying, and I guess we'll stay tuned and see.
We will, and we'll lean on you when we need to. David, thank you very much for calling in. It's great to have you on this developing story involving something very close to home for us.
I've worked in a couple of places. Always good to know where you work.